What's up, guys? MC Stu here, and today we're going to take a look at ability, activation, and rotations. Like with pretty much any other MMO, your ability, rotation, and activation is extremely important, and that is not any different in STO. It is complicated, I guess, let's say, depending on the build and the complexity of the build. And what we're going to look at today is just kind of the very basics of the abilities that you want to be activating, keeping up as much as possible, and then some other things that you can sprinkle in there depending on the kind of traits you have and those kinds of things. So what we're going to focus on today is going to be for energy weapons builds. So this is going to cover scatter volley. This is going to cover fire at will and also beam overload firing modes. And you're going to find that they're all pretty much the same when we're looking at the basic level. They will start to vary depending on the traits that you have and things like that. And we'll get into that here in just a little while. So let's go ahead and take a look here. I'm going to make my bar a little bit bigger. All right, so what we're going to be focusing on is the number 7 tray on this particular build. We'll talk about some of the other trays here in just a moment. The number 7 tray is my continual up as much as possible time abilities that I want to be running continually if I am in combat. I have this tied to a keybind of my spacebar. And so let's just kind of look at a few of the abilities here and talk about why they're there. So this particular build is using Boilers for the cooldown. If you don't have that, that's okay. I am reinforcing that with Photonic Officer. So if you don't have Boilers, you don't have the duty officers for Ox to Bat, you're a newer player, or you're just starting to maybe put together builds that you're trying to make them more effective, and you haven't looked at cooldown reduction methods. I'll link a video down in the description for you guys on that with a couple different methods. On this particular build, we're going to look at it in terms of using Photonic Officer. Like I said, Boilers is on there. And if you don't know, Boilers is a personal space trait. When you activate any of your Bridge Officer abilities, you have a chance to cool down all the rest of them. So most of the time it works well. I find, though, that I still need to augment that a bit with something like Photonic Officer. So let's forget about that for the moment, though, and look at the number 7 bar with just keeping in mind Photonic Officer. So Photonic Officer is a cooldown ability. What this does when you activate it is it's going to run for 20 seconds, and it is going to give you 2% cooldown reduction on all your Bridge Officer abilities every second. So 2% every tick, you're going to get that reduction. Now, this runs for 20 seconds and has a cooldown of 30 seconds, and you cannot reduce that cooldown at all. So there is a space trait. Generally, you're going to tie it in with the science build, improve Photonic Officer, that does help with this, but that's neither here nor there. Just in case you were wondering or you're aware of that, that is the only thing that will affect this. So the way that I have this set up is I'm going to start with the cooldown ability, because we're going to have 10 seconds where that isn't working, and I want that to be running as the rest of the bar is being activated. I did run it at the end, and you can do that. Some of this stuff is going to be minute in the way that the difference is. So you could put this at the end, activate all of your abilities with that running last. I just find, at least for the first burst in the rotation, that I'm going to have all of my abilities taking advantage of this as soon as they start. Because the problem is that you can't activate this entire bar at one time. So as you start to click it, and I'll do it here, it takes a few moments for everything to activate there. So you're looking at about 3 seconds on a full bar, 3 to 4 seconds to fully activate. And you'll see on these Bridge Officer abilities here, you're getting a little bit of a quicker tick every few seconds. And so with that rotation, and again, I do have Boilers, so that's going to affect some of this, but this isn't about that. So we're activating the cooldown ability, and then we're going forward with the rest of them. So let's kind of move down the list here, because it's pretty self-explanatory. If you want to know more about cooldown abilities, then check out the video down in the description. Next, what we have here, all energy weapon builds should be running emergency power to weapons. And the reason for this is the bonus damage you get for it. You're also going to get a big chunk of reduction to your power cost, as well as, in my case here, fire cycle haste. And this is tied to, I think, the #1 trait in the game for energy weapon builds, and that is going to be emergency weapons cycle. And so anytime you run or activate emergency power to weapons, you're going to get a huge reduction in weapons power cost and that 20% fire cycle haste. This is huge because anytime you run any kind of a firing mode for your beam weapons, your energy weapons, you're going to get a much larger power draw here. And if you don't have a way to augment that and reduce the amount of negative pull that you're getting, you're going to have a big damage reduction there. So I don't want to go too deep into kind of why the things are here specifically with all the different traits, because I realize some people may not have some of this stuff. So if we forget about the traits, I would still have this starting lineup to start with here. Okay, because even if you don't have that trait, you still want to have this for this bonus damage and the plus 40 to your power for your weapon. So this is huge. When I'm starting a brand new character, the first things I'm slotting as soon as I can is a firing mode, so beam overload, cannon scatter volley. Next, as soon as I unlock an engineering slot, it's going to be the emergency power to weapons. And then as soon as I can fit in photonic officer, and I have that available to me, it's photonic officer. So I'm going to have 1, 2, and my firing mode. Those are going to be my main things that I'm going to slot. If you have nothing else, you don't have the captain's abilities unlocked, or some of these are lockbox abilities, then you're still going to have these 3 items to start with. So now I realize that people are going to have different things here, and let's talk about kind of how and why I've kind of organized them the way that I have. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to boost cannon scatter volley, or if it was beam overload, beam overload. And what I generally do is I'm going to build out in either direction from that firing mode with abilities, starting with abilities that have the smaller of the up times. So for instance, if we look at attack pattern alpha, it has 20 seconds of uptime. But if we were to jump over to chemosite laced weaponry, this only has 10 seconds of uptime. If we look at brace for impact, this is going to have a 15-second uptime for the bonus damage. So what I've done is I've made it to where the things that aren't going to last as long are as close as possible in this particular rotation. So that I'm going to get as much of this stuff as possible stacked up as long as possible on my main firing mode. Now, some of these things are going to be just your personal preference. So I have spread at the end. I have a torpedo on the front, secondary firing mode that I have. I want it to just be going off whenever I want. And so I have that in my rotation. Now, there's some people that don't use keybinds, either because they just don't like it or don't want it, or they want to just manually be able to activate specific things. And I have builds where I have, say, high yield, and I want to be able to use that exactly when I want to. And if that's the case with any of these abilities, then pull them off and manually click them. But with the way that I play the game and my play style, I like to brawl. I like to get in there as quickly as possible. I'm always going to be in combat as long as I can help it in the TFOs. So as soon as the cooldown's up and we're moving, or as soon as the next wave spawns, I'm in there as quick as possible, and I want all of this stuff to just be going and shooting. If you were doing something that an organized team, or maybe you're building more around running some of the episodes or things like that, then you may want to pull some of this stuff off the bar, so you can say, I'm going to just save this spread for when I have a whole bunch of enemies or when I want to be able to use it. So this isn't so much about what to have on your bar other than your cooldown, your boost to your firing mode, and your actual firing mode itself. The rest of this stuff is going to be optional. Same thing with batteries. On newer tunes, I'll build these with one of my other higher level tunes, I can actually craft them, and I'll manually click the batteries because I don't have as many of them, and I need to conserve them, and I want to use them exactly when I want to. So with having a longer cooldown and not a way to reduce the cooldown on batteries, that might be something you want to manually activate as well. So again, this isn't so much about all these other little things about what you should or shouldn't have in there. If you want to copy it, go ahead. But really more so about where do we want the cooldown ability, and what are the main things that you need to have if you're going to be running a energy build. And again, that's going to be a cooldown reduction, emergency power to weapons every time, and then your main firing mode. Let's say this ship was a beam build. I wouldn't change one thing on here except for cannon scatter volley, and it would be beam overload in this instance with the way that this ship's built. Now, you could, if this was a build or a ship that was maybe a little bit more tanky and that kind of thing, and you wanted to use fire at will, you could also drop fire at will right in here. And again, I wouldn't change anything along with this. Now, where things start to get more complicated, and we'll just kind of touch on it for a moment, is when you start to build up traits and different things that you can use with fire at will, you can get more uptime by using a trait called Entwined Tactical Matrices. And what it does is, let's say that this was fire at will. I click this, fire at will goes off. And when I do click fire at will, it also gives me torpedo spread 1. So I get a free torpedo spread 1. Well, when I get to the torpedoes here and I click that, it's going to give me my torpedo spread 2, and it's going to give me a free fire at will. The problem is that they override each other. So if this was a fire at will build and I was using Entwined Tactical Matrices, I would be manually clicking the torpedo spread because I don't want it to override my fire at will 3, which is what I would use here. So torpedo spread in that instance would be down on my tray, and I would be watching my buffs down here. So as soon as fire at will 3 was up, I would hit my torpedo spread, and that would give me fire at will 1. So these are going to be very situational, what you have in here. Again, the point is more so to kind of look at what's the best way to organize these and what are the must-haves regardless of what you have. So again, if this was a brand new character at level 40, I'm going to have Photonic Officer, I'm going to have emergency power to weapons, and I'm going to have my main firing mode. Now, I'm not going to get into torpedoes because that is just completely different, expensive and complicated, but it would be similar if you weren't building a meta build and the traits and stuff, you don't have those and it's whatever, then the same would apply. So let's say you're doing something on the budget, you have Entwined Tactical Matrices, and you want to build a torpedo build that's mainly spreads, then I would have basically the same kind of a setup, minus obviously emergency power to weapons because you won't need that for torpedo, and then I would have actually scatter volley 1 and I would have fire at will 1, because those would rotate between each other without canceling each other out and give you spread 1, so you could keep those up. And in fact, I think they will cancel each other out. You used to be able to stack them up, so again, it would be similar to your fire at will build, and you could rotate between that. But again, I don't want to go way down that path because it gets a lot more complicated. Let's jump over and take a look at a build that uses a different cooldown method and see how that changes the way the rotation is. All right, so this character is from on my main account. This is a newer character. I've had it for about a year, and I've just kind of slowly been working on it, so it doesn't have all the different bells and whistles. But you'll see a very similar kind of setup in terms of the rotation. We're starting with emergency power to weapons here, and we're ending with the cooldown method. The cooldown method for this particular build is aux to bat. So this uses duty officers at any time I use auxiliary to batteries. It's going to give me a large chance to cool down the bridge officer abilities. And then I'm using a second one, so I have that chance again, and then it'll also cool down the other copy of aux to bat. So they kind of work in tandem. It's unlike if you were to have, say, Photonic Officer and 2 of them, even if you clicked one, the other one goes on global cooldown, and it comes off a cooldown before the first one, it's still not going to have any effect on Photonic Officer. So in case you're wondering, you cannot stack Photonic Officer to work on itself like you can with Aux to Bat. Aux to Bat for anything that's not Psi or anything that if you're running hanger pets and that's kind of your main thing, you're going to be draining your auxiliary like crazy. That's why in this instance, in most of my builds, I don't run it real high regardless, but this isn't a method that you're going to want to use cooldown wise for science builds because you need that auxiliary power. On a build like this, that really doesn't matter at all. So we're looking at basically the same kind of a rotation, except in this instance, we have our cooldown method at the end. And the reason for that is that Photonic Officer being at the beginning, if I click Photonic Officer, it runs for 20 seconds. And if I already had this running and then I click Photonic Officer, it would then start to cool this down faster. If I had Photonic Officer already running and then I click another Bridge Officer ability, this will immediately start to cool down faster. So it doesn't matter. You don't have to activate Photonic Officer before or after a Bridge Officer ability, just as long as the effect from it is running for that 20 seconds or during that 20 seconds. Anything that was activated already or is activated after during that 20 seconds is going to receive that cooldown. Now with Aux to Bat, that's not the case. If I click this, it's not going to do anything because it's an instant effect that happens. So if I were to activate, let's say, Torpedo Spread, then I activate Aux to Bat here, then we should see a reduction in the cooldown. And it also gave me a little bit of a reduction on the other copy of it. So these are at the end of this rotation because if you were to activate all of this first, it would be a waste and it wouldn't do anything. You need abilities running. So if there's no abilities running or only one and you use these, then you're going to find that you're not getting anything for it because it will only cool down abilities that are currently activated and on their cooldown cycle. So that's why we're seeing this in this way. So let's just take a look through the rotation here. So I'm using just the lower level batteries here, and that's because I just don't have any of the higher end ones. So I just crafted these just as a placeholder, but I would have my regular energy batteries would be second, and then I'm having my attack pattern beta, firing mode, and the same kind of thing I'm building out from the center here. Now there are some quirks with different things where you have cycles that get interrupted and stuff like that, and that is a thing. But it's something that's like out of my control. There's things that you can do to help with it, but the problem is one day it works and one day it doesn't, and it gets fixed and then it pops up again. So for me, I just forget about it, and I know that that is a thing, and that's something that we might see comments on about those interruptions because of the way they interact. It's not supposed to happen, but it does in some cases, causing misfires or things like that. If you're being competitive and you're min-maxing, you're probably already aware of all of this stuff. Or if you're working towards going to a place like that where you want to be on the min-max level or whatnot, then that's something that you would want to pay attention to because it could ruin a whole run if you have one whole firing cycle of a firing mode that doesn't activate and works. That will make or break your run. So we're building, again, from the inside out around our firing mode. I'll just talk about some of the abilities that I have in here just in case there's questions on it. And so hazard emitters is one of them. So this ship is kind of squishy, so it's nice to have that just kind of running, and it's up pretty much full time. But the main reason that it is there is because I am running, let me pull it up here, Strategist. And with the logistical support, anytime I do a heal, I'm going to get extra crit chance. So if we take a look here, I am at 50% critical chance, and I'm at 257 critical severity. If I hit hazard emitters, we will see that jump up by 2%. So along with the cooldown reduction, if we run that, this is going to be up basically full time. So I'm able to keep an extra 2% critical chance, which is as much as you would get, out of one of these tactical consoles, just by having hazard emitters and running that specialization. And it's a twofer because the hazard emitters is going to give you that heal over time. It's going to give you, the hit point regen, and it's also going to wipe hazards and dots off of you. So it's a twofer. So, you're getting that extra crit, and it's not one of those things where you're slotting something that it's not good for something else. You're also getting the heal over time out of it, which is nice. Now, the other thing that I do that might be a little bit different from some of you guys is I'm running some captain's abilities on the bars here. So let's talk about that for a moment. So with Go Down Fighting, I'm using a good day to die, so I can click this anytime. I don't have to be under 50% health in order to get that 50% all damage bonus. So this is a really nice clicky. The reason I have it on my spam bar, though, as opposed to down somewhere where I can just click on it, is because I am using a trait, and let's just take a look at that. That is Intelligence Attaché. So anytime I get a critical hit on an enemy, I'm going to get 2% cooldown reduction on Captain's abilities. If I did not run this trait, I would not have these on the bar because the cooldown is too long, and I would want to be able to time out when I'm going to use Attack Pattern Alpha and when I'm going to use Go Down Fighting. So I would have it down here somewhere, however you organize your bar. I'm coming up against the boss or whatever it may be, and then I would manually click those so I could get the most out of it. And again, when I'm going up, say, we take out most of the ads and we're approaching the boss, I'm easing up off of my spam bar here. I'm manually just clicking my cooldown reduction so I can get everything I can off of cooldown. And then I'm engaging the boss. I'm clicking those, higher end abilities along with DPRM, with Tactical Fleet, all the things I can buff, and then I'm hitting my rotation again so I can get as much of this stuff stacked up along with the universal consoles and other abilities, so that as soon as I start attacking the boss, it's going to be, what we call, the alpha strike, your alpha damage. You're buffed up as much as possible. When I'm just starting a particular TFO or in between, I'm cleaning up ads, I'm not going to be clicking DPRM unless I'm about to die. I'm not going to be clicking the tactical fleet. I'm just going to be using my standard rotation, making sure that I'm keeping up emergency power to weapons and hazard emitters and all my firing modes and anything that I can buff it as much as possible. So again, this is personal preference, having the captain's abilities on the bar, because this has very high crit chance, and because I have that trait. This is something that cools down pretty damn fast, 20, 30 seconds. So I'm able to keep these abilities up quite a bit because of the way that this is built. So again, if this is a newer tune, or you're not max level yet, what I would have on this is going to be emergency power to weapons, the highest rank I can slot, batteries of any kind that I have access to. I'm going to have, if I have a attack pattern that I can put in either Omega or Beta, I'm going to have that. I'm going to have my main firing mode. Hazard emitters I would be able to fit on here. And again, this ship, I like to run a torpedo in the front, and so I have spread on here as well. And then I have my cooldown ability. Again, if this was a newer tune, I most likely aren't going to have the duty officers for Aux to Bat, so I'm going to be running Photonic Officer at the front. Lastly, let's take a look at, quote-unquote alpha strike rotation. Okay, so this is just kind of a fun build I've been working on. This is my main character on my main paid account, and you'll see a similar kind of a setup as we've been looking at. And again, each build I have is going to vary a little bit in what I have in my rotation. So this character has access to a lot more of the higher end stuff and the lockbox stuff and those kinds of things. So we'll just take a quick look at the rotation here. So on this one, I have batteries first because they're unaffected by any kind of cooldown. Then we have Photonic Officer, we have emergency power to weapons, and then fire at will, and it goes on. You see similar things here. This is a Miracle Worker ship, so I am using the exceed rated limits. And then I'm also using, and this is a good example of something where I want to manually click it. And it's not so much about the cooldown on this ability. It has more to do with it's affected by your distance to the target. So if I'm outside of 6K, you're not getting much out of it. If I'm closer, then I'm going to get a lot more damage boost from this. So the damage boost ranges from 35% to 15% bonus energy weapons damage. So this is something that I want to strategically click when I'm in a range that is close enough to where I can get as much as I can out of it. So it's not that I'm always going up and getting in the face, but I'm making sure I'm at least within that range where I'm going to get that 15 or more percent. I don't want this going off as I'm entering the battle and I'm buffing up, because it just gets wasted because I wasn't in range of that target. So this is a good example of something you would want to manually click as opposed to having it in your rotation. Or if, let's say you're not using a keybind, but you're still going to lay out your rotation, so you're just click, 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 and you're going through it all, you still wouldn't want to have this in there, or you would want to have it segmented so you're not clicking it unless you're going to be in that proper range. Now, this particular build is a fire at will build. I am using it with Entwined Tactical Matrices. I have the Torpedo Spread here, so when Fire at Will comes off a cooldown, I can click on Torpedo Spread. Now, I don't have 2 of these abilities slotted in the Bridge Officer ability slots. I just have both. I have the same copy twice, and that's just for me, so it's easier just to kind of whip over and just click in this area, and as long as I get one. But these are the same exact abilities. You see there's no shared cooldown here. So on this particular build, I was focusing on Fire Cycle Haste. This is similar to what you would do with a Cannon Scatter Volley build, but I wanted to mess with it in terms of Beam Fire at Will. I want to see beams shooting out everywhere as quickly as possible. And so I have a second keybind set up here, and you could just click this manually again, if not, in my row 10. And so what all of these do are going to give me bonus damage and Fire Cycle Haste. And so if I'm saying, we'll just use ISA for an example. When I start the map, as I'm about to enter combat on that first group, I am going to hit my keybind, so I activate all of these because I want to get that biggest spike at the beginning, or whenever you want to get that biggest spike. These I'm not activating kind of nilly-willy. These are all meant to just be completely stacked all together and get just an insane amount of bonus damage and Fire Cycle Haste along with my standard rotation. Now I'm using some traits in order to cool all of these down faster, because these are all universal consoles, and most of the time I can have these cooled back down by the time I get to the end of an ISA. But regardless of what you're running, I'm then using control abilities along with a trait that is cooling these universal consoles down quicker. But even if you don't have that, I just wouldn't have this stuff. I would be using hazard emitters like we were looking at on the last build, and finding other things that are going to be useful for the build. But this is an example here where I have my standard rotation bar going, and then I have a second rotation that's my quote-unquote alpha strike rotation. When I want to just completely buff up as much as possible and get the most damage out of it, that's when I'm going to go and use these things. These are not going to be in the regular rotation, not only because I want to be able to stack them, but the cooldowns, the base cooldowns on them are long, right? So, you get 20 seconds of uptime, and then you have, what, a minute or 2 minutes before you can use that again. If they're in your standard rotation, there's a very good chance that these things are going to end up getting wasted, or you're not getting as much out of it because maybe there's only one ad left and that gets activated, and then you smoke it and you're moving to the next group, and this is just running and it was wasted. So this is another example of where you'd want to segment your rotation so that you have abilities that you choose to use at specific times, and your main rotation bar are going to be things that you want running all the time as much as possible, regardless of what is happening. Why don't we go ahead and, I know ISA isn't the favorite, but it's quick and it's straightforward and it's easy to kind of compare it to other runs. Why don't we go ahead and take this into an ISA, and you can just kind of see how I go through that in using these abilities. So you'll see the activation of the bar going, the uptime, all the time stuff, and then you'll see where we're using these segmented pieces. One other thing too, and I'll just in case there's questions. So you'll see that I have copies of things in different places, and this build is mainly for ISA. You could use it in anything, but I have things laid out in a way to where timing wise I'm able to have things up when I want them up, because I know the map well. I know how long it takes to get through certain parts of it. And so when I approach the first group, I use evasive maneuvers, and I activate this ability at 17 seconds before it starts, and then I use this to get there. And what that does is that allows me about halfway through the first group, this ability gets activated again and cools down evasive maneuvers again. So I basically, it times it out so that in between the first group and the second group, I have this up when I need it in both instances. That works most of the time unless you go in with a group that kills that first group really fast. But again, we're getting into kind of a side thing where it's more specifically about that. But you'll find, there's TFOs that you like to run more than others. And don't be afraid to kind of tweak your builds and the way things activate and where they are, for those. And you can do that in a way to where it helps. But if I take this into any other run, it's perfectly fine. Just by activating this, it just guarantees that I'm going to have this ability up, basic maneuvers, as much as possible. And I don't have to remember to be clicking this in order to cool it down. So don't be afraid to experiment with that. If there's certain things you like to run, or you're going into story mission, maybe you're having a hard time with it, tweak your activation abilities, the orders that you're using them, and things like that. Have fun with it, and you can really kind of customize the way some of these are laid out for either a particular run, story content, or whatever it is that you're doing. Let's go ahead and jump into a ISA. I'm going to log it just because I always do. Especially on something like this where we're just playing with some new stuff to see how well it does. So let's go ahead and jump into that. All right, so I'm going to talk through this here. So we're going to start with activating this emergency powered engines, as we discussed earlier. So we have the proper rotation there. We're going to launch our pets, set the firing mode, and in about 5 seconds I'm going to start buffing up. Once I get up against there, I'm going to do the alpha strike. And some bad piloting. We got a cannon scatter volley user in here, and he is doing work, so that is nice. I've activated torpedo spread so that we can keep fire at will up. And you see, by having that on, that emergency power to engines on my bar, I'm able to keep the evasive maneuvers up full time, which makes it nice. And I forgot about my unconventional procs, but we'll start using them now. I don't think I'm going to have my universal consoles back off because this is moving really fast with having the cannon scatter volley user in here. And whoever it is, they know what they're doing. You see they're positioning behind the gate, so they're hitting the gate and the cube at the same time. Like I said, quick and easy, especially with, depending on who you get dropped in with. Oh, that's a good job. All right, so that went extremely fast, and that wasn't because of me. That was because of the other person that was in there using the cannon scatter volley with a very good build. So I wasn't able to get through some of those rotations or be able to use them multiple times in terms of the alpha strike. So in most pug runs you're going to get into, they're going to last more than a minute, and 30 seconds, and that was probably less than that for that particular run. And so generally, in most average runs on that, you're going to be able to get these abilities back up. Also, because of the pace of it, I was not using my control abilities, which cool down my universal consoles. I was forgetting to click them at the start because of the pace of that. But in any case, you can see the entire time we're trying to keep these things up as much as possible. You see, by having, in this particular build and the way I had this put together, emergency powered engines, that continually made sure that I had evasive maneuvers up so I could get around that map. If I didn't have that slotted in the way that I did, I would have been playing catch up, getting to areas of the map, and things would have been already dead. And so that's a good example of, you never know who you're going to get dropped in there with. And a lot of times, I'm playing on my free-to-play accounts or tunes, I don't have all of that stuff, right? So I'm going to be, not doing as much damage as some of these other people that are getting in and smoking stuff before you can get there. And so for me, that's one of the reasons I like to personally focus on, maneuverability speed. So I have my engines up, because even with, a person like we saw in that particular run, I was able to stay up and get, stay right with him. In fact, I got to the right side before he even did, even though he basically was the one obliterating everything in there. So, these scenarios are, in this ship, I built it because I want to be able to take it anywhere I want. I want this, to be my daily driver for now, for doing my endeavors and all those different kinds of things. I really like fire at will. It's fun. You got to make sure you're at least a little bit tankier, have some survivability there in order to use it. Otherwise, you can attract too much attention. But again, this is an example of, segmenting out larger parts, of the rotation, unlike the other two builds that we were looking at. And this one has basically a rotation that's specifically for max boosting up everything that you can all at once. All right, well, I think that covers everything. Again, like everything else in this game, it's not just complicated, but it depends on what you have and what you have access to, So, to recap again, let's just look at the basics. If you're running an energy weapons build, you have your cooldown ability. In this instance, it's Photonic Officer. You're going to have your battery. At least I like to have my battery. You can manually click this if you don't have lots of them. emergency power to weapons, must have, and then you're going to have your main firing mode. In this instance, it's fire at will. And if you have access to any of your attack patterns, you're going to want that on your bar as well. If you have some premium things like Chemosight, lace weaponry, you want to have that on there. On this, I have the emulating phaser lance because this procs another trait that gives me massive amounts of critical severity, I think it is. But I mean, between getting this console and getting the trait that it affects, you're talking about, you're talking about a promo ship and a lockbox ship. Some of this stuff gets expensive, obviously. So if we forget about that, you stick with the basics, stick with your stock, abilities that you have access to. Put these main abilities on your bar, these 4 right here, and as you pick up other things that add damage and are procs, drop them on the bar as long as the cooldown isn't too long on them, and build from the inside out or the middle out around your main firing mode so that you can have as much of those boost up around the same time that your main firing mode is up. So that's the gist of it. That's where you want to start. Again, I'll link down in the description I'll do 2 videos. I have one specifically about Photonic Officer. That one's the easiest to get. You can just buy that from the vendor. I use it on all my free-to-play, and I mean, this is my main, paid account, my main tune, and I'm using it on here as well. So it's an easy trait to get or ability to get. It's super cheap. I would highly, highly recommend using that regardless on what level you are. You only have to have a ship that has Science Officer at Lieutenant. You can slot it is where it starts there. The higher the ability or the rank, the better the cooldown. So on this particular one, it's rank 2, you're getting 3%, and on the rank 3, you're going to get 4% per second. So just make sure those are there. I'll also link down in the description a video on cooldown reduction in general, and it'll go over Photonic Officer again, and also Aux to Bat. So if that's something you're interested in getting, I apologize for the background noise. The garbage truck is out front, and it is loud. All right, guys, I think that takes care of it. Let me know if you have questions. Let me know how you guys use your rotations. Again, everybody does things different. And you might be looking at some of my stuff, seeing something glaring, saying, wait, man, you should be doing X, and I always appreciate that kind of feedback. I do think, though, like I said, in terms of the very basics, having those 4 abilities on your rotation, I don't think there's any argument on that. There's no reason not to be keeping those 4 abilities up as much as possible. That'll, I mean, if you're not doing that and you start doing it, you're going to notice a massive difference the moment that you do it. So I highly recommend at least starting with the basics and then adding in, things that you have that's available to you, or, things that you have that, complement the particular kind of build that you're putting together. All right, guys, as always, I appreciate you very much for watching, especially if you made it to the end here of me just talking and talking. You guys are awesome. And until next time, stay safe and have a good one. Hey guys, appreciate you watching. Be sure to hit the thumbs up button, ring the bell, and sub to the channel for the latest news updates and how-to guides.